Thank you very much. And Professor Bowling, thank you for sharing the formula. I've always struggled with anterior caudal length, and now I know how to do it. These are just my conflicts of interest. I work with majority heart valve industries at present with the sole aim of hopefully that we surgeons influence the future designs. So one of the things is I think most of us have done valve in valve or valve in ring. I think most of us have definitely implanted TAVIs. But one of the things is we are still implanting surgical rings and we are still implanting heart valves. So I think it's very important to understand what we are doing at present, which will be eventually beneficial to the patient once they come back, if they do. So 4 points we're going to focus on is which patient is appropriate, which is very important, which surgical valve is appropriate for valve in valve today. Similarly, which ring is appropriate if the mitral repair fails. And lastly, but very important, is we are implanting now sutureless valves and what are the constraints, if at all, when they come back for a valve in that space. So definitely, I think once we decide, in St. Thomas's, we just don't decide whether the patient is high risk for surgery. When the patient is referred to me for a valve, I decide what is also the life expectancy of the patient. And I'm going to give you some examples to justify that. The reason for that is these are the results from valve registry, and I want you to concentrate on the middle part, is that the success rate is only 93%. These are expert centers. You've got malposition in 15%. You've got coronary obstruction in 3 to 4%. Gradient, again, can be very high, especially in small valves. So essentially, with all these problems, what it means is that every patient who comes to you with a degenerative heart valve is not for valve in valve. Let's take an example. This is a patient which was referred to me around a year ago. 70-year-old man who is relatively fit and well. According to me, life expectancy is definitely going to be more than 10 years. He's a very robust man who does trekking and hiking, is fitter than me. Should I do redo or should I do valve in valve? And so this is the kind of debate which was going on. So if I do valve in my center, we can finish it in 45 minutes, no blood loss, no contrast. Patient is extubated on the table, goes home on third or fourth day. So this is very good. But this patient is going to come back to me. And when he comes back, unfortunately, that time I will have to reoperate him. And he is not going to be 70-year-old fit man, what he is today. He's going to be probably 78-year-old man who has got few other problems. If I do a redo operation at this point, I can still explant the valve with a relatively low risk. I can still give him a 23 valve, which has worked very well for him for 10 or 15 years. And then when he comes back to me at age of maybe 80 or 85, I will do a valve in valve. So I think in this scenario, my option today, however hard I'll have to work instead of TAVI, will be to reoperate this patient. Let's take another situation. He's a 64-year-old man who comes who has got a lot of comorbidities. Looking at him, his life expectancy is going to be anything between 3 years to 10 years. And in this patient, in my center, we'll definitely do valve in valve. In fact, my youngest patient I've done valve in valve was a 29-year-old man who has undergone 6 heart operations since he was 3 months old. So these are the patients you have to choose correctly. You can give them a better outcome. The biggest problem we face today is this, that if you look at any projected data or previous data from any company, the largest valves which are currently implanted are either 21, 19, or 23. Now, all these valves, the internal diameter is 19, or maybe if you're lucky, 20. That means they're very small. The smallest TAVI valve which we have is 23 size. Currently, only 20 size has recently been available, but up till now, the 23 size was the smallest. So that means if you put a TAVI valve in these patients, there's going to be a 4 millimeter oversize, at least in these patients. So this is not probably a perfect fit. You're going to have residual gradients, and also you may end up with coronary obstruction. So I'm just going to quickly run through what you should do if you get a patient, start thinking about these problems and prevent them before they occur. So what are the basically causes? MitraFlow gets a lot of slack because there are some incidences of coronary obstruction. But what people forget is coronary obstruction also has been reported with other designs. And the reason it happens is because of this. It's not just the valve design. It's the narrow sinuses which play an important role. And it's the oversizing which plays a very critical role. So I'm just going to show you a figure regarding this. So this is a patient with a valve which is with a very narrow sinus. And then this is a similar patient with a larger sinus. When you put in a TAVI valve in this patient, the first patient, you're going to oversize it. The stents are going to go lateral, and this is more at a risk of coronary obstruction than the other patient, because in this patient, although the stents are deflected, you're not going to have a problem. So it's pretty important to choose the right patient and right valve. So this is a SAPIEN 3 implanted in St. Thomas's nearly 4 years ago, while recently we have got now size 20. And size 20, I can guarantee you, is not going to deflect the stent as much as 23. So you're going to have a better fit, better function, and probably very, very low risk of coronary obstruction. So what's most important is don't blame the valve design, but blame your own selection or my selection, and use the correct TAVI valve, and you will have less problems. It's very important, as we discuss a lot of things, is, we need to know we are implanting all these valves and they're coming back, is what valve you are treating. There are at least so many valves in the market which have been implanted in the last 20 years that they are very different. They're absolutely different. So it's important to know what valve it is, because they dictate the size of the TAVI you use and also how you position it. If you go back to my first slide, remember 15% malposition. And that's because every valve looks very different. So I'm just going to run through very simple things in this. Currently, there are 15 stented and 7 stentless valves. Actually, the number is growing. And all of them are produced in a variety of sizes, which we all know. Some may be too small, as we discussed already. Some may be too large, especially in the mitral size. So the important concept to understand first is true ID. We all know very well that these charts which are available, they basically give you a label size. And we know that, say, for example, the 25 size doesn't mean the stent size is same. The 25 label size between two different companies have completely different dimensions. But what is more important is this concept of true ID, which becomes very important in TAVI. So I'm just going to get you through these 3 different types of valves, which you all can relate to very easily. One is a porcine valve, where leaflet is always mounted inside. And if you measure the mechanical diameter inside, which is relevant, it always goes down by 2 to 3 millimeters. What it means is, if you refer to a chart which says 25, the internal diameter may be actually 23. If it's a pericardial leaflet valve, for example, such as Magna and etc., it goes down by 1 millimeter. And if it's a design like MitraFlow and Trifecta, where the leaflets are outside, the stent design remains and the stent ID remains the same. It's important because look at this example. This is a Carpentier-Edwards porcine valve, which is size 27. If the stent ID is 25, but the true ID is 23. Now, if I take the stent ID, I'm going to implant a much higher valve or bigger valve, and that will push the stent post much out, and then they will have problems such as coronary obstruction and high gradient. So it's very important to know what is the true ID, and forget about the stent ID. Stent ID is not that important. Positioning is again very important. This is the second important part. You know that if people who have done TAVI, we take so-called annular plane and deploy the valve in relation to the annular plane. But where is it in the surgical valve? So we designed a term called neoannulus. I think the neoannulus is where it's the narrowest, and that gives you the anchor, and that's what you should be measuring, and that's what you should be targeting. And if you know where it is, then what you do is you put these valves few millimeters below that, and then the valve's not going to embolize, and valve's not going to have a malposition. It's not going to be low, or it's not going to be too high. To prove this hypothesis, what we did was we inflated easy balloons inside with contrast and found that the narrowest annulus in majority heart designs is actually at the sewing ring. And if you know the sewing ring, then you can implant the TAVI valve really correctly. And this is, unfortunately, as I said, the designs look very different. So in design number 1, if the sewing ring is visible, it's great. It doesn't matter it's intraannular, supraannular, or which company manufactures it. You can see the sewing ring. What you do is you just deploy your valve to that. But the design number 2 is a problem because these valves have the stent frame, which is radio opaque. Now, stent frame, you know, doesn't tell you where the sewing ring is because I'm going to show you an example of that. And the third valve is really unfortunate because nothing is radio opaque, so it behaves like a stentless valve. So this is an example of Sorin Soprano valve. You can see the sewing ring beautifully, and that is why you deploy the valve, as I said, few millimeters below that, and you have a beautiful, perfect result. But if you have this valve, It's provided in two ways, intraannular and supraannular manufacturing, and that's the problem. Because in the top, the sewing ring is at the bottom of the frame, while in the intraannular design, the sewing ring is already a few millimeters above. And that's why you have to choose correctly how you deploy. All this information is there in the app, so I'm not going to go into details of this. The biggest malposition is with Mosaic, because in Mosaic, you have got stent post markers only, so you have no idea where the sewing ring is. And in the bench work, we have provided now guidelines on if you are going to do a TAVI in Mosaic, then you should follow these guidelines. And if you deploy these valves according to this, which is very simple in practice, you will always end up with a good result. Essentially, you should know where the sewing ring is. And in stentless valves and some of these valves, you don't know. And you can do a BAV, see where is the waste in the balloon, and then you can use that as a reference point. Or if you are lucky, you've got a very good echocardiographer, then you should use that during the TAVI. There are a lot of questions about mitral, and as we know that a lot of people are doing more and more mitral repairs or mitral replacements, and these patients do come back with failure. And initially, the TAVI community for mitrals, this is great. Big size valve, no conduction problem, no coronaries, this is fantastic. Just stick in a TAVI valve and go home. And then we realize that actually it's not that easy. In fact, I think mitral is more challenging. And this is because there are incidences of delayed embolization as well as LVOT obstruction. So I'm just going to show you very quickly why this happens. So oversizing in mitral is very crucial because the closing pressure on the mitral is much higher, which is the systolic pressure, than the aortic valve, which is the diastolic pressure. It's very simple. So you can end up with these two kind of deployments. One is a parallel deployment, one is a conical deployment, which is like a wine cork. And so this is an example from one of my friends' center. They did a TAVI. This was a Magna 29, and they put a 26 Sapien. I had actually advised them to put a 29 Sapien. I got a phone call saying, Vinny, all your app is wrong. We have got a perfect result. And I was actually kicking myself and thinking, that's actually true. You know, it works beautifully. This is another example where you can see the difference. It's a conical deployment. That means that the ventricular portion is a bit wider than the inflow or the neoannulus. This is the example I was telling you about. I hope the video plays. Is there a mouse? So this was an excellent result and a phone call from my friend. And it looked very good. And then 3 months later, he called me saying, oops, it's a problem. This is exactly what happened in this patient. And then when they reoperated the patient, essentially the valve had slipped up. And the reason it had slipped up, I think, is because of the parallel deployment. And then this trend has been observed now in few more cases, nearly the 8 cases I know of. And that's why you should know exactly how you are deploying and what sizing you're using in the mitral. Valve in ring, unfortunately, of course, repairs are going to come back and everybody is operating. All rings are not same. I do get queries every week. Vinny, can I do this? Can I do this? So this is a very quick pitch on what the rings are. So as you know, there are at least 21 rings in the market, which we are doing. They can be complete, incomplete. They can be rigid, semi-rigid, radio-opaque, not radio-opaque, and they come in many sizes. The dimensions which are provided, unlike the valve, are not circular. So you should know what is the projected diameter, so to speak, because when you use a TAVI, it's a circular valve. It's not a valve which fits into the shape of the ring. So what is the diameter? And of course, with some rings, you can do some bench testing to find out. But we have done a lot of research, and then soon there will be an average diameter and area which will be available for users. For example, a Physio 32 appears too big for a 29 Sapien, but in reality, if you measure it, the average diameter is only 27, and hence you can use a 29 Sapien very safely. But if it is a Physio 34 ring, then it goes beyond the 29 range, so you should be aware of that. What is an ideal ring? The ideal ring would be something which is seen under X-ray, because you are doing the procedure under X-ray. It gives you a good anchor, because that's what you want. You want the valve to stay there. And the third thing, of course, is it can become circular. That's very important. And one of the examples, you know this ring is Memo 3D. It doesn't look circular to start with, but when you implant a Sapien valve inside it, it looks circular, and it preserves the function of the Sapien valve. In fact, according to me, this is the most ideal ring because it gives you all 3 parameters which I think are very crucial if you are going to do a mitral valve in a ring. Let's take another example. This is, well, you can see it very well. This is an IMR ring. However, it destroys the valve completely because it's such a rigid ring that it actually deforms the SAPIEN valve to its shape rather than deforming to the shape of the SAPIEN valve. And hence, you should be very careful if you are considering a TAVI in this patient. I would not recommend. Third thing is this ring, again. It's a beautiful ring. It provides a very good anchor, but you can't see it under X-ray. So again, it's a good design, but unfortunately, when I'm doing the case, I have to rely on echo. And if the echo images are not good, then it's a big problem. So important thing is check size and as well as rigidity and the suitability. Lastly, but very quickly, of course, you've seen a fantastic presentation on Perceval, but the reality is all bioprosthetic valves will degenerate, especially if you're going to put them in younger patients. So essentially, you should know if you're going to do a valve-in-valve, how does it look under X-ray, what is my landmark, and where is my neo-annulus for the Perceval valve. So we have done a lot of bench tests with Sorin provided us with valves, and this is a quick run-through of if you are faced with this challenge, what you should be doing is you should be implanting the SAPIEN valve to the bottom of the Perceval valve, and that's the ideal position. That's ideal position because one, it fixes beautifully, and the second, it covers the leaflets of the Perceval valve completely. If you implant it lower, the leaflets of the Perceval are going to overhang on the top. And if you implant it higher, it in fact might even dislodge with the balloon pressure the Perceval valve or the SAPIEN valve. So this is the most ideal position of the SAPIEN valve. What happens if you use core valve? Now, you know that core valve and portico have got a top structure. And this shows very nicely that if you implant it lower down, actually the top structure actually is collapsed and it's not fully expanded, which may have implications on its function. And this becomes very obvious in this picture. As you can see, I think you all will agree that this is a better position. So you should know if you are going to use a particular valve that it is suitable or not. So essentially, if you are using a SAPIEN to the bottom, as well as if you are using a core valve or portico to the bottom of the Perceval. And I think, just to summarize quickly, you individualize patient selection depending upon their risk and the life expectancy. In my center, I always think of the second procedure, not the current procedure which I'm going to do. That helps me a lot in choosing the right procedure. Small valves, very important to choose the smallest device and look for any problems. Don't blame the valve. I think we should blame ourselves if we choose the wrong patient. And lastly, ring properties as well as sutureless valves, they can be done, but you have to be a bit careful at this point. Thank you.